A man with blood on his hands stands at the threshold of a decision that will break or build him. Marcus Kane, half-Shoshone, half the ghost of his own making, has just buried his mother in the frozen ground outside Fort Benton. The ground took 3 hours to crack open, and every moment of that labor was a conversation with grief he thought he'd already paid for. But grief, it seems, never stops collecting interest. He's been running from something for 7 years. 7 years of work that didn't matter, money that turned to ash, and the knowing, that terrible crystalline knowing, that he'd abandoned his people when they needed him most. The gold mines up in the Copper Basin need able bodies, and they're paying double for men willing to risk the northern passes before the snows come. That's where he is when she finds him, though finds isn't quite the word. More like fate stops dancing around them both and does what it's been meaning to do all along. Eleanor Thorne rides into Fort Benton like she owns the territory, not because she's rich, though the wealth sits on her shoulders like a visible burden. She rides that way because she has to, because the world has taught her that women who hesitate get swallowed whole. Her father runs the Copper Basin operation. Her mother was a Blackfeet woman who died when Eleanor was 6 years old. That inheritance sits in Eleanor's bones like a problem no amount of inherited money can solve. She speaks Blackfeet. She speaks the language of mines and ledgers. She speaks the language of people who don't quite belong to any world that will fully claim them. Eleanor needs someone to take her into the basin. She needs someone who knows the passes, and knows the people, and knows how to move through the red earth without announcing themselves like fools. She needs someone who won't treat her like a fragile thing to be shuttled from one safe place to another. She needs Marcus Kane, though she doesn't know it yet. Marcus refuses. He refuses immediately and with a clarity that surprises him. The work itself doesn't frighten him. The passes are dangerous, but he has moved through dangerous all his life. What frightens him is the risk of remembering why he left, why he ran. Because Eleanor Thorne, with her mixed blood and her solitary bearing, and her eyes that have seen more than they should have seen, is the kind of mirror he's been avoiding for a decade. She will ask him things he doesn't have answers for. She will make him feel things he's buried beneath layers of necessary numbness. But his sister needs medicine. His cousin's child has scarlet fever. The money the basin can offer, real money, the kind that could matter, isn't something he can refuse on the basis of discomfort or fear. So Marcus Kane, who has gotten very good at saying no to the world, finds himself saying yes to a woman who reminds him that he once had principles before he made himself into a tool. Eleanor presents the contract with the precision of someone who learned long ago that emotion clouds transactions. She lays it out clean: passage to the basin, safe arrival, protection if needed. She will pay what other men get paid. She won't ask for conversation or company beyond what's necessary. She understands the risks and accepts them. She understands his hesitation and doesn't insult him by pretending not to see it. Marcus listens and hears what she's not saying. He hears a woman who has learned to negotiate the world like it's a dangerous animal that responds only to confidence and clarity. He hears someone who has already calculated the likelihood of danger and decided she's worth more than that danger. He hears an echo of his own resignation, that particular flavor of sorrow that comes from accepting what you cannot change and moving forward anyway. The money will take his sister's family out of the territory. The money will give them options. The money will mean that when he lies down at night, his chest won't feel quite so hollow. These are the arguments Marcus makes to himself. These are the promises he clings to as he agrees to take Eleanor Thorne across the Copper Range before the season turns. They leave on a morning that tastes like endings. The cold is the kind of cold that strips away pretense. There are 6 days to the basin if the weather holds. If it doesn't, if the early storm everyone's been whispering about actually comes, then they have less. Maybe much less. Maybe the kind of less that becomes final. Marcus packs the way he packs for all dangerous work, efficiently, without sentiment, with everything calculated for weight and necessity. Eleanor packs like someone who has never quite learned to travel light, not because she's frivolous, but because she's learned that the world requires you to carry proof of yourself, proof that you're educated enough, refined enough, legitimate enough. Her trunk is smaller than most, but it's still heavier than it should be. They ride out at dawn, with the sun rising copper over the eastern ridges, and Marcus understands for the first time that he's not just escorting Eleanor Thorne. He's also walking towards something he hasn't allowed himself to face. The weight of it settles on his shoulders like an old coat he thought he'd left behind. They make camp in a dead valley where the wind comes down, like something alive and hungry. Marcus builds the fire while Eleanor handles the horses with a competence that surprises him. She's done this before, knows how to read an animal's mood, knows where to tie and how tight. They eat without speaking, sitting on opposite sides of the flames where the darkness presses in thick and absolute. Marcus thinks about all the journeys he's made alone. Years of them, years of moving through the land without making footprints that mattered to anyone but himself. And now there is Eleanor Thorne across the fire from him, and somehow her silence is louder than any speaking could be. She tells him, finally, when the fire has burned down to coals, that her father doesn't know she's coming. She's left a letter, she's left instructions. What she hasn't left is permission, because her father would have given her reasons not to come, and Eleanor has reached the age where she needs to stop collecting reasons and start making decisions. Her brother is ill, truly ill, the kind of illness that might not be survivable. She needs to be there when the outcome reveals itself. She needs to be present for what comes next, whatever that is. Marcus understands this in a way that runs deeper than words. He understands what it means to be pulled between duty and love, to feel them as opposing forces when they're supposed to be the same thing. He understands what it means to arrive somewhere too late and have to spend the rest of your life understanding what that lateness means. They settle into separate blankets as the night deepens. Marcus lies awake, watching the sky and thinking about the decision he's made, thinking about how a man can convince himself that he's running towards something when really he's running away, thinking about how a single job, a single journey, can become the moment where everything changes. When the trajectory you've been on suddenly reveals itself as wrong, and you don't know how to course correct because the muscle memory of running is all you have left. Eleanor lies in her blanket and thinks about illness, about the particular helplessness of knowing someone you love is suffering and being too far away to touch them, to speak to them, to be present for the small moments that matter more than the big ones. She thinks about fathers and their expectations, about mothers and their absence, about the ways that love and inheritance can become indistinguishable from one another until you don't know which one is driving you forward. Neither of them sleeps much. The cold doesn't allow it. The knowing doesn't allow it. That peculiar knowing that comes when two people recognize each other as broken in similar ways. On the third day, the passes become treacherous in ways that mathematics can't quite capture. The rocks are red with iron, and in certain light they look almost like they're bleeding. Marcus navigates using a knowledge that lives in his body rather than his mind. The way a bird knows to fly without thinking about it, Eleanor watches him and sees a man transformed by terrain. Out here, he's not someone caught between worlds. Out here, he's a creature made entirely of this place, moving through it with the fluidity of water, finding its path downward. They ride through a canyon where the walls come so close that Eleanor can reach out and touch stone on both sides. The trail here is barely a thread. Below them is a drop that doesn't resolve into anything comforting. She doesn't speak about her fear. She doesn't ask if they're safe. What she does is breathe and trust, and there is something so fundamental about this act that Marcus feels it like a physical touch. She is trusting him, not because she knows him, but because she has decided to. because she has calculated the cost of doubt and found it too high. They stop in a wide place where the canyon opens slightly and there's room to stand without feeling the walls breathing down on you. Eleanor's hands are shaking. She hides them, but Marcus sees. He always sees. It's the curse and gift of his attention. He notices everything about Eleanor Thorne, the way she holds her shoulders, the particular quality of her silence, the manner in which she has learned to make herself small in spaces that don't welcome her. She tells him that her mother used to tell her stories about this region, stories passed down from the Blackfeet people, stories about spirits and strength and the ways that the earth itself teaches you what you need to know if you're paying attention. Eleanor's mother died before she could teach Eleanor how to survive this knowledge, but Eleanor carries it anyway, embedded in her bones like something alive and waiting for moments exactly like this one. Marcus realizes that he's been alone for 7 years, because alone is safe. Alone you can't fail anyone but yourself. Alone you can pretend that your cowardice is just pragmatism. Alone you don't have to face the fact that running away from your people has made you less human, not more. Eleanor Thorne, with her trust and her inheritance of 2 worlds, is making that pretense impossible to maintain. They move forward through the canyon as the light begins to fade. Behind them and ahead of them and all around them is the red earth, and Marcus understands that some journeys don't take you to destinations. They take you into yourself, deeper and darker and more honest. The attack comes on the 4th day, at a moment when vigilance is lowest, that hour just after midday, when the sun is warm enough to make a man forget that danger is still breathing. They come from 3 directions, riders moving with the coordination of men who have done this before, outlaws looking for easy targets, looking for a lone man and a woman foolish enough to be traveling with relatively light protection, looking for opportunity. Marcus moves with the speed of someone who has been waiting for violence all his life. He pulls Eleanor from her horse and toward the rocks with a force that would hurt if she let it. She doesn't let it. She understands immediately that pain and protection are sometimes the same thing. They find cover in a stone outcropping, while the attackers burn through ammunition and patience in equal measure. What happens next is not the kind of thing that stories make pretty. Marcus fights like a man who has something to lose now, and the knowledge that he has something to lose makes him both more careful and more ferocious. He fights like someone defending not just his own life, but Eleanor's, and that matters in ways that affect every breath, every movement, every calculated decision about where to strike and when to pull back. One of the attackers gets close, gets very close, closer than Marcus can prevent. Eleanor sees the knife coming and does the only thing a person without weapons can do. She moves into the space between pain and action and becomes something other than what she was. She is no longer a woman who has learned to move through the world quietly. She is a force of resistance. She is someone protecting instead of being protected. This distinction shatters something inside her, or maybe it repairs something that has been broken since birth. When the attackers finally withdraw, either from wisdom or exhaustion, Marcus discovers that he's bleeding from 3 places, each wound deep enough to matter. Eleanor discovers that she's bleeding too, though she's not certain from where or how badly. What matters is that they're alive, and the sun is still moving across the sky, and they haven't stopped moving forward. But Marcus is hurt in ways that complicate everything. The bleeding from his shoulder won't stop completely. His left arm is weaker than it should be. The thought occurs to him, clearly and without doubt, that he might not make it to the basin, that his body might have finally said enough, that consequence has finally caught up with flight. Eleanor spends the hours after the attack tending to Marcus's wounds with a focus that borders on violence. She cleans them. She binds them with strips from her own clothing. She forces him to drink water and eat, though she has to use language that sounds like command to get him to accept the care. She's furious with him, though for what exactly neither of them can quite articulate, for bleeding, for being human, for making it impossible for her to continue pretending that this is just a job, just a transaction, just a journey. That night Marcus admits something he hasn't said out loud to another person in 7 years. He admits that he's tired. Tired of running, tired of being the kind of man who destroys every connection the moment it threatens to matter, tired of using caution as an excuse for cowardice. The admission hangs in the darkness between them like something dangerous and necessary. Eleanor doesn't respond with comfort. What she does is lie beside him close enough to share body heat, and the closeness itself becomes a kind of response, a language older and more honest than words. By the 5th day, it's clear that Marcus can't continue at the pace they've been maintaining. His fever has begun its work, and fever is a thief that steals clarity and strength in equal measure. Eleanor makes the decision to stop in a canyon where there's water and shelter and enough material to make something approximating comfort. She has learned things about medicine from her mother, things that were transmitted through stories and observation, and the particular knowledge that comes from living in a place where doctors are days away. And survival is something you negotiate with the earth directly. She builds poultices from plants she knows, and some she guesses at. She forces Marcus to sleep while his body fights the infection trying to take root in those wounds. In the fever dreams, Marcus travels through the years he's been running. He sees himself as a young man, maybe 18, sitting with his father and talking about duty and obligation and the ways that a people survives when the world is trying to erase it. He sees the moment when he chose to leave, when the weight of all that obligation became heavier than he could bear. He sees the years after, the ways that freedom tastes like ashes when it's purchased with betrayal. Eleanor sits beside him through the fever and lets him talk, though half his words are in Shoshone and half in English, and some are in a language that exists only in the space between sleeping and waking. She understands more than she can articulate, understands that this man is carrying the weight of his ancestors like a physical burden. Understands that running was the only thing his body knew how to do when that weight became too much. Understands that somewhere along the way he convinced himself that moving away was the same as moving forward. On the 2nd night of the forced stop, Marcus's fever breaks. The crisis passes in the way crises do, suddenly, without warning, the body deciding to live instead of fade. Eleanor doesn't celebrate. She simply continues doing what she's been doing, which is keeping him alive and present and held within the space of her attention. When Marcus wakes with his fever gone, the first thing he sees is Eleanor's face, and the recognition that hits him feels like lightning striking through his chest. He understands that this woman has saved his life. More than that, she's saved the possibility of his becoming something other than what he's been. She's made it impossible for him to simply continue being the man who runs. She's made it necessary for him to consider the man he might become if he stayed. They sit in the shelter of the canyon while the light moves across the stone walls, and neither of them speaks. The silence between them has become a kind of honesty that words would only confuse. The journey resumes on the 7th day, but something has shifted. The agreement between them, the one that was supposed to be purely transactional, has become something that defies definition. Eleanor has become something more than an employer. Marcus has become something more than hired protection. What they are to each other now is a question that neither of them can quite answer, because to answer it would mean making choices about the future, and both of them have learned to live in the present, in the space where consequences haven't yet arrived. But consequences arrive whether you're prepared for them or not. Marcus realizes, as they move through the final approaches to the basin, that he's going to have to make a decision. The money from this job will help his sister, will help his people, but it will also be money that came from leaving, money earned through absence, and accepting it will mean accepting that he can buy redemption, which is something he's no longer certain about. Eleanor is thinking about her brother. The illness that pulled her here is real, but so is something else. So is the knowing that when she arrives at the basin, things will go back to being what they were. Her father will make demands. The world will reassert its claims on her. She'll be expected to perform the role of dutiful daughter, to ignore the mixing of her blood, to behave in ways that don't threaten the comfort of people around her. Being with Marcus, traveling through the wilderness with him, depending on him, having him depend on her, has made that performance feel impossible to resume. And yet resume it she will, because duty and obligation are the languages she speaks fluently, are the languages that have been written into her very DNA. There's a morning where they stop overlooking the basin. It's visible below them, a spread of human construction carved into the landscape, mining operations, a settlement, the architecture of extraction and labor and profit. Eleanor stares at it for a long time. Marcus stands beside her and doesn't try to interpret what she's seeing or feeling. He simply stands there, a presence and a witness. Eleanor asks him what he'll do after the money is paid, after his obligation is fulfilled. Marcus doesn't know. The truth is that he's never known. Living in the future has always been impossible for a man who has spent so much time being determined to escape it. He's never built plans that extended beyond the next job, the next payment, the next reason to keep moving. Eleanor suggests something radical. Suggests that he stay, suggests that the basin needs people who understand the land the way he does, suggests that maybe running has taught him everything it can teach, and now it's time to learn what standing still might offer. The suggestion hangs between them, fragile and dangerous and full of possibility. Marcus says he needs to think. Eleanor says she doesn't have time for thinking. Her brother, her father, the future that's been waiting for her and won't wait any longer. She says this with a gentleness that breaks Marcus's heart because he understands what it means. It means she's already accepting what comes next, already saying goodbye, though they haven't yet reached the end. They reach the basin in late afternoon when the light is golden and deceptive, making everything look more beautiful and less true than it actually is. Eleanor's father is waiting. Marcus had imagined this moment differently, had assumed anger or resistance or a father defending his daughter's reputation. What he finds instead is something more complicated. Her father loves Eleanor. It's clear and visible, and aches with the particularity that comes from raising a child alone after your wife's death. He loves her, and the loving has made him afraid, and the fear has made him protective in ways that have slowly become suffocating. He pays Marcus what was agreed upon, more, actually, as a gesture of gratitude, or perhaps payment for discretion. Marcus accepts the money because to refuse would make things awkward. And what he and Eleanor need right now is quietness and clarity, and the space to process what has passed between them. The money feels heavier than coins should feel. It feels like the weight of transformation, or perhaps the weight of not transforming. Eleanor's brother is alive, though barely. The illness has taken much from him, and his body is moving towards something that might be healing, or might be simply delayed ending. Eleanor takes one look at him and understands that the urgency that brought her here has become something else entirely. She's arrived, yes. She's present for whatever comes next. But what she feels now is not triumph or relief. What she feels is the expansion of time, the understanding that moments like this can stretch infinitely if you let them, that a single bedside visit can contain entire lifetimes of meaning and absence and longing. Marcus finds himself accepted into a complicated social space. Eleanor's father trusts him because Eleanor trusts him. Eleanor's father also understands, in the way that men understand such things, that something significant has happened during the journey. He doesn't ask questions. He simply makes room at his table and treats Marcus with a respect that would be easier to refuse if it felt false, but it doesn't feel false. It feels genuine in a way that complicates everything. That night, Eleanor finds Marcus outside the settlement, looking out toward the territory they've just crossed. She tells him that her father has offered him work, offered him a position, money and purpose, and the possibility of staying. She presents this as though it's information he's entitled to have, though they both understand what the offering of this information means. It means she's leaving the decision to him. It means she's refusing to beg or demand or convince. It means she's trusting him to find his own way to the truth. Marcus holds the weight of this decision, holds the money and the job and the possibility of Eleanor in his future the way some men hold prayer, holds the image of his sister's face when he told her he was leaving again, holds the understanding that staying means facing all the things he's spent 7 years running from. Staying means building something. Staying means risking failure and heartbreak and the particular vulnerability that comes from letting someone matter more than fear. Over the following days, Marcus discovers that indecision is its own form of action. By not leaving, he's already making a choice. By sleeping in the cabin they've provided and eating with Eleanor's family and speaking with her father about the territory and the future of the operations, he's already begun the process of staying. The choice itself becomes real only when he accepts it, not when he makes it. He works at the basin, works at learning systems he's never needed to learn before, works at being part of a structure instead of standing apart from it, works at imagining a future that extends beyond the next season, the next payment, the next escape. It's harder than he thought it would be, and easier. Harder because commitment is a discipline his body hasn't learned. Easier because Eleanor is there, and her presence makes the work feel meaningful in ways that money never could. Eleanor's brother begins to heal, slowly. The illness releases its grip not all at once, but degree by degree, moment by moment. The recovery is not complete and may never be complete. There are parts of him that the fever has claimed and will keep forever. But he lives, and living becomes its own form of triumph. Eleanor watches her brother return to the world, return to breath and appetite, and the small concerns that fill the days of people who are going to have future. The urgency that brought her here transforms into something she didn't anticipate, the gratitude of witnessing someone she loves choose to continue living. Marcus and Eleanor fall into the rhythms of a shared life. Not smoothly. There are moments of friction and misunderstanding. There are times when Eleanor's expectations clash with his still-forming understanding of how to be present rather than absent. There are times when Marcus feels the old pull toward running, when the habit of escape threatens to override the choice he's made to stay. These moments don't disappear with time. Rather, they become something he knows how to navigate because Eleanor has taught him that staying through difficulty is itself a form of strength. He sends money to his sister, sends regular payments for years. Eventually, he visits her. The visit is awkward and full of things that should be said but remain unsaid. But it's a visit nonetheless. He's begun the process of rebuilding what he abandoned, which is a different thing than returning to what he left. The people he hurt by his running have moved on. They've built lives that don't include him. What Marcus has to offer now is not restoration, but something humbler. Consistent presence, and the acknowledgement that his absence mattered, that it created damage, that he carries responsibility for that damage forward into all the days of his life. Eleanor's father eventually comes to understand that the relationship between his daughter and Marcus is something that will not fade or resolve itself into something more convenient. He begins to make peace with this understanding, not easily, and not without resistance to what it means about his daughter's future, but he makes peace Because love for Eleanor requires accepting that she has the right to make her own choices, even when those choices run against his preference or his fear. The first real winter after they decide to make a life together is brutal in ways that the journey didn't prepare them for. This is the kind of cold that settles into your bones and waits for spring. This is the kind of difficulty that tests whether commitment is something that survives scrutiny or whether it dissolves under the pressure of hardship and monotony. The mines shut down for months. The settlement becomes a small, contained world of survival and routine, and the particular madness that can come from too many people in too close proximity for too long. Marcus and Eleanor weather it differently than they might have alone. Eleanor teaches Marcus how to plan ahead, how to store not just food, but hope, the way some people store flour, how to create beauty in small spaces, how to make a home feel like more than just a shelter. Marcus teaches Eleanor how to accept limitation without surrender, how to move through difficulty with the knowledge that it will eventually pass, how to trust that endurance itself is a form of victory. There are nights when Eleanor wakes and finds Marcus sitting by the window, staring out at the frozen landscape. She knows he's thinking about running, knows that the pull has never entirely gone away, will probably never entirely go away. Because running was how he survived for so long that it became part of his architecture. She doesn't make him speak about these moments. She simply sits with him, and her sitting is a kind of anchoring, a reminder that there's something worth staying for, even when the habit of leaving is calling. By spring, they've learned how to be together in ways that don't require constant reassurance or explanation. They've learned the rhythms of a shared life. They've learned that love is not just the moment of choice, but is instead the endless series of re-choosing that happens every single day, sometimes hourly, sometimes moment by moment. They've learned that the people we become when we stop running are not always recognizable to the people we were, and that this transformation is both loss and gain in equal measure. Eleanor realizes, as the weather begins to warm, that she's happy in a way that feels almost suspect because she spent so many years being trained not to expect happiness to be accessible to her. Being happy feels like violation of the rules she learned as a girl. Being happy with a man who is half-native and who will never fully fit into the circles she was born into feels like betrayal of her class and her heritage and the expectations that have been woven into her identity. And yet the happiness persists, because happiness is not something that asks permission. It simply grows where it's been planted, and Eleanor has stopped trying to kill it. On a day when the snow has almost entirely melted, and the world is in that liminal space between seasons, Marcus and Eleanor walk to a ridge that overlooks both the basin and the territory they crossed to get here. They stand in silence for a long time, watching clouds move across the distant mountains. Marcus tells her finally what he's never quite been able to articulate. He tells her that leaving his people was the most cowardly thing he's ever done, that every day for 7 years he knew it was cowardly, and he did it anyway, and that knowledge became its own form of torture. He tells her that meeting her didn't fix this, didn't erase what he did or make it retroactively righteous. But meeting her made it possible to imagine that running could become something else, that escape could transform into return, that the person he abandoned could become someone he could, with time and work and genuine effort, be a brother to again. Eleanor tells him that her mother's death fractured her in ways she's never told anyone about, that growing up half inside and half outside every community she was supposed to belong to made her feel like a mistake, like a living contradiction that needed to be resolved or hidden, that her father loved her desperately, and that desperate love made it harder, not easier, because she understood that she was supposed to be grateful for being tolerated, for being loved despite her mixed blood, for not being too much of an embarrassment to handle in public. She tells him that the journey with him, the danger and the difficulty, and the absolute necessity of trusting him completely, gave her permission to stop apologizing for existing, gave her permission to be fierce and uncompromising and certain of her right to take space in the world. That loving him hasn't solved the problem of being caught between worlds. If anything, it's made the fracture more visible, more real, more present. But it's also made the fracture feel like less of a wound and more like a characteristic, something that defines her rather than diminishes her. They stand together as the wind moves through the mountains, and the wind carries the sound of everything that has passed between them. It carries the sound of leaving and returning, and the particular courage it takes to choose staying when running has been your only strategy for survival. Years pass, years that look like work and struggle, and the gradual rebuilding of what was broken, not just in Marcus and Eleanor, but in the communities they move through, in the territory they now call home. Marcus eventually makes peace with his sister. Not complete peace, not the kind of peace that erases what he did, but the kind of peace that comes from showing up, doing the work, being present for the decades that remain. His sister doesn't forgive him, exactly, but she accepts him, and acceptance is sometimes all a person can hope for. Eleanor's brother makes a full recovery, though he'll carry the scars of his illness forever. He and Marcus eventually become partners in the mining operations, and their work transforms the basin in ways that try, imperfectly, to be more just and more mindful of the territory and the people who have always belonged to it. It's not redemption, it's not that kind of simple and neat, but it's an effort. And the effort itself matters, and Marcus spends decades making that effort because Eleanor has taught him that this is what love looks like. Not passion and romance and the drama of grand gestures, but showing up, doing the work, continuing to choose the person you love and the community you belong to, day after day after day, until the choosing becomes so natural that you can hardly remember what it felt like not to choose it. Eleanor and Marcus marry in a ceremony that honors both her father's culture and Marcus's people. Neither fully accepts them, but enough do, enough show up, enough make space for this union that doesn't fit neatly into existing categories. They marry because they've realized that love, if it means anything, means being willing to be visible with another person in ways that feel risky and exposed and fundamentally human. They have a daughter. She's born with Marcus's eyes and Eleanor's voice. She grows up understanding in her bones that belonging is more complex than the world usually admits. That identity is something you build rather than something you simply inherit. That the people who love her most are the people who have been broken and have chosen to keep rebuilding themselves, for her, for each other, for the possibility of something better than what they started with. In the end, what remains is not the dramatic moments, though those matter. What remains is the ordinary of Marcus teaching his daughter to read the land the way his ancestors taught him. The ordinary of Eleanor, sitting on a porch watching the mountains and understanding for the first time in her life that this is home and that she's allowed to have one. The ordinary of two people who chose to stop running and discovered that what was waiting for them on the other side of running was worth every moment of difficulty it took to get there. The red earth that once felt like a place to escape from becomes a place to return to. The mountains that once seemed like boundaries become shelter. The struggle that once felt like punishment becomes the work of building something that matters. Marcus and Eleanor spend their lives in this territory, and they leave it different than they found it. Not because they tried to change it, but because they stopped trying to escape it and started trying to belong to it instead. And this, finally, is the truth that the journey teaches them both. Belonging is not something you find in some other place, with some other person, in some other life. Belonging is what happens when you stop running and when you choose, with full knowledge of the cost, to stay, to build, to love, to transform not the world but yourself, and hope that your transformation ripples outward in ways you'll never fully understand, touching people you'll never meet, creating possibilities you'll never know about. The red earth holds them as it has held many, and in the end, that holding, that patient, ancient holding, becomes the only home either of them has ever truly needed. Decades later, when Marcus's hair has turned to silver and Eleanor moves through the world with the authority of someone who has paid for every inch of ground beneath her feet, they stand once more on that ridge overlooking the basin. Their daughter is grown now with children of her own. The settlement has transformed, not perfectly, not without contradiction and compromise, but transformed nonetheless. The mining operations are less extractive than they once were. More people from the native territories have found work that honors their knowledge rather than simply exploiting their labor. It's not justice. It's not that kind of clean or complete, but it's an attempt. And the attempt has rippled outward in ways that neither Marcus nor Eleanor anticipated when they made their choices all those years ago. Eleanor tells Marcus something she's been carrying for months. She tells him that she's dying. The illness is not dramatic or sudden. It's the illness of a body that has been worked hard and loved hard and has finally decided it's time to rest. She tells him this with the same clarity she brought to every major decision of her life, not seeking comfort or false reassurance, but simply stating a fact and waiting for him to integrate it into his understanding of what comes next. Marcus doesn't break. He has learned, through decades of choosing to stay, how to hold grief alongside gratitude, how to honor both the ending and the gift that the ending follows. He takes Eleanor's hand, the same hand that saved his life all those years ago in the canyon, the same hand that has worked beside his through all the seasons of building and growth and the small accumulated victories that make up a life well lived. They walk down from the ridge together, moving slowly because Eleanor's body requires it now, and the slowness itself becomes a kind of grace. Moving slowly means noticing more, noticing the light on the rocks, noticing the particular silence that comes before rain, noticing each other in a way that people often lose when they've been together for so long that presence becomes assumption. In her final months, Eleanor works on something she's never spoken about. She writes letters to her daughter, to Marcus, to her father, who passed years ago with Eleanor's forgiveness wrapped around him like a blanket. Letters that her daughter will eventually read to her own children. Letters that will carry Eleanor's voice forward through time in ways that she herself will never witness. In these letters, Eleanor doesn't try to explain her life or justify her choices. She simply testifies. She testifies to what it meant to love a man who had been broken by abandonment and to watch him choose to rebuild. She testifies to what it meant to discover that belonging is not about where you're from, but about deciding again and again to stay. When Eleanor passes, quietly in the morning light, with Marcus holding her hand and their daughter holding vigil from the doorway, something fundamental shifts in the landscape around them. Not literally, not in ways that can be measured, but fundamentally, the way certain losses reshape the entire world because they reshape the person who is left to witness it. Marcus is old now, old enough that his own ending is visible on the horizon, close enough to feel its presence, like a shadow that moves with you through every room. He doesn't leave, despite having the option, despite having decades of practice in the art of running. Marcus stays. He stays in the basin. He stays in the life they built. He stays in the routine of work and memory and the particular conversations he has with his daughter about Eleanor's legacy. He stays because leaving now would be its own form of betrayal, because there is work still to do, because the commitment didn't end when Eleanor died. It simply transformed into a different kind of devotion. Marcus becomes a keeper of stories. He tells the young people who come to work at the basin about the territory and its history. He tells them about the Modoc people and their resilience. He tells them, carefully and without romanticizing, about the cost of the choices that brought him to this place. He tells them that belonging is something that has to be earned through effort and vulnerability and the willingness to be wrong and keep trying anyway. His daughter eventually brings her own children to this work. They learn from their grandfather the languages that are often lost. They learn the stories that might otherwise fade. They learn that redemption is not something you achieve and then possess. It's something you enact day after day in small and ordinary ways that accumulate over a lifetime into something that might, from a certain angle and in a certain light, look almost like grace. When Marcus finally dies, on a day when the light falls across the mountains the way it did on the day he first saw Eleanor Thorne, the territory mourns him, not universally, not without complication, but genuinely, because he had spent decades proving that a man could change, could return, could spend his later life trying to repair what his earlier life had broken. This itself becomes a kind of testimony. This itself becomes a kind of hope for all the other people carrying regret and shame and the weight of choices made in desperation and fear. Eleanor's letters are eventually published, not because anyone chose to publish them, but because their granddaughter recognized their power and their truth, and understood that these words needed to move out into the world beyond the family they were meant to shelter. In those letters, Eleanor speaks about what it means to be caught between worlds. She speaks about love as resistance. She speaks about the choice to stay as the bravest choice a person can make. And people who have never been to the basin, people who will never meet Eleanor's descendants, people who carry their own fractures and their own struggles with belonging. These people read Eleanor's words and find permission to continue living, find permission to be complicated and uncertain and unwilling to fit neatly into the boxes that the world has prepared for them. The basin, over time, becomes a kind of beacon, not because it's perfect or because the work that Marcus and Eleanor started has resolved all the injustices and complications it meant to address, but because it represents, in its imperfect and ongoing way, the possibility of transformation. It represents what becomes possible when people who have been broken decide to do the work of healing, not for themselves alone, but as an offering to the people they love and the communities that will come after. Years and decades and eventually generations pass. The names of Marcus and Eleanor fade from common memory. They become historical figures, then symbols, then almost abstractions. But the legacy persists. It persists in the ways that the territory is managed. It persists in the relationships between native communities and the people who work the land. It persists in the stories that get told around fires and in schools and in the conversations between grandparents and grandchildren. It persists in the countless decisions made by people who never knew Marcus and Eleanor, but who were shaped by the world they helped create. And perhaps this is the deepest truth that the journey teaches. Perhaps this is what commitment and love and the courage to stop running actually means. Not that your life becomes a story with a clean ending. Not that your suffering transforms into meaning in any simple or satisfying way, but that your work, your constant, exhausting, humble work of choosing to stay and build and love, that work ripples outward in ways you cannot predict or control. That the people you touch carry forward something of your transformation, that in choosing to stop running, you make it possible for others to do the same. That in choosing to belong, you widen the definition of belonging for everyone who comes after. The Red Earth continues its ancient work. It continues to hold. It continues to teach to those who know how to listen that strength is not the ability to escape, but the ability to return. That love is not a feeling, but a practice. That redemption is not a destination but a direction, and that moving in that direction with intention and humility for decades across generations is itself enough. It is itself the grace that the journey was always meant to deliver. Some journeys don't end where you expect. They end where you finally stop running and start belonging. That was the weight of Red Earth. If you felt the dust and the heart of this tale, then don't ride off just yet. There's more waiting on the trail ahead. Check out our other Western stories, tales of love, loss, redemption, and the wild truth of the frontier. See you on the next trail, partner.